Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Community Development Housing General Government Committee, our May meeting. We have on our agenda today, we have 5 general agenda items, and we have 16 consent items. Presently, are there any consent items that the council or committee would like to pull?
C2.
C2. C1, C3, C4.
3.
C6.
On there somewhere?
Yeah.
All right.
I got 1, 2, 3, 4. What else?
C1, C2, C3, 4, and 6.
Excellent.
Are there any other?
I'll make a motion to approve the balance.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded to approve the balance of the consent agenda. I think, are we doing the hand raise?
I'll show you how to do it. You got it.
Wait, Robert's going to teach somebody technology?
Got it, got it. I know, join just popped up.
Oh, John did? We got to refresh.
All right. The system is
Technology
working.
doesn't like me.
Wait one moment.
All right.
I don't,
It's a mass.
yes.
It's been unanimous voting from the committee. First item, please,
I don't
from the
use no
consent.
electric can opener.
C1, strategic plan update.
What I'd like is a 2-minute review for the listening audience and those that are here today, and in knowing where they can go find this plan update.
Yes, ma'am.
Because we got lots of updates.
Lots of-
Okay? Thank you.
2 minutes, yes, ma'am. Scott Tesh from the Office of Performance and Accountability. Good afternoon to the chair and members of the council. There is a memo attached to the item. I would direct you to that memo. We have a strategic plan for FY 2017 through 2021. In February, the mayor and city council had an update workshop and created 16 new priorities ranked across the city. From those 16 priorities, management has drafted 39 new action items to address what council says are the emerging needs of the city over the next 2 years. You'll find that in those in the memo and also in the PowerPoint presentation that's attached. If members of the community want to see these draft action items, they are more than welcome to go into the agenda system and see them. You will have an action item next month to approve the update to the plan, and so we will have the actual physical plan for the community to look at next month. But the items that are to be included are included in the packet of information this month. If you have any other specific questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Any questions? Yes, Councilmember McIntosh.
When will we revisit this again? Will we do another strategic planning update next year, or is this a biannual?
I would assume that we're going to do it biannually. The plan ends in 21, and so I think we would be looking at a different strategic plan, potentially with a slightly different framework going into FY22.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All right, could I get a motion for approval, please?
I move for approval.
Just
Well, this is for information.
Just for
I'm
information.
sorry. All right, next agenda item. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
C2, resolution approving naming of the gym at William C. Sims Senior Neighborhood Center located in the East Ward.
Come on up. Hi.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hey, we are recommending the name at W.C. Sim Center. I'm sorry. The W.C. Sim Center to be renamed in the Benjamin Piggott after him. Benjamin Piggott served with the Community and Recreation Parks as a director for over 30 years. He successfully had programming for Bingo for Turkeys, which was providing food and resources to underprivileged families, as well as Peace Word for Toys.
Okay. Councilmember Scipio, any comments?
Yes, this is, I think most of you may know Ben Pickett.
Yeah.
He is one of those special people who come along every now and then. His passion for the community, his love for children, he gave so many tireless hours devoted to impacting lives. It is rare that I go anywhere in the community that people don't remind me about Ben Pickett. Mr. Pickett, he has children. If you see him, grown-ups are coming to him who he impacted. I believe when we name things after people, it's a great way to say we respect what you did. we recognize how you've impacted so many lives. And this would be a great honor for him because he is a living entity. He can live this. He can experience it. It's not a memorial. And I think so many people in the community are so supportive of this. I can't tell you how many people ask that we consider this. So I fully support this naming opportunity.
Could we have a
And
motion?
I move that we adopt it or accept it.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor?
Chair.
Yes, excuse me, Councilman Messer.
Who is W.C. Sims?
He was a former supervisor in the recreation department. We had about 5 African-American supervisors from the late 50s, the early 50s, until many of those rec centers closed. And he was one of them, as was Roscoe Anderson, who's out at Reynolds Park.
Are we stepping on any toes by?
No, this is just the gym
Okay.
inside of the center.
Much like Art Blevins
Got
at
it.
Haynes Hoser.
Cool, thanks.
It's been approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next agenda item, please.
B3, resolution electing the 2019 inductees to the Winston-Salem Arts, Culture, and Entertainment Memorial Walk of Fame.
Okay, who do we have for that? Go ahead, Mr. Rao. What I'm looking for again, because this is historical, these are people that contributed to the community. Again, because it's a live transmission, I want people to know in the listening audience that, again, we're doing this.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, Chairman Adams, members of the City Council.
Good afternoon.
The city now has an annual process for receiving nominations for the Winston-Salem Arts, Culture, Entertainment Memorial Walk of Fame. This year we received 9 nominations. A panel of residents reviewed those nominations and have brought forward to this committee and then ultimately the council 3 recommendations. One, Doris Partington, who was one of the founding members of the Little Theater of Winston-Salem. Norman Johnson, who was the founder of the Piedmont Opera Theater, and John H. Heath, who was a highly sought-after gospel recording soloist. I think his breakout hit, according to the information provided, was Put Your Hand in Mine. Also a well-known minister, performed a great deal on local TV stations, and so has had a very distinguished career in gospel music. So those were the 3 recommendations that came from the panel. Previous inductees, starting with our 2016 inaugural class, include the 5 Royals, Larry Leon Hamlin, Phil Haynes, William Samuel Scales, John Iluli, Chris Murrell, and Dr. Robert Wise. I know it's been some time since these initial classes were elected, and we are planning to actually have the medallions installed in the sidewalk on the Cherry Street side of the Benton. The plan is for that event to take place in July, so we'll have that construction starting here in the next several weeks to get those medallions installed. As part of that, we'll recognize all of the inductees up to this point, and any family members or others who are representatives of these inductees would receive a commemorative plaque, also honoring their induction into the Walk of Fame.
Can we try to coincide this, Mr. Rao, since the theater festival starts the last weekend in July? If we can back it up to the weekend prior or whatever, and, finding out what's going on, because it would lend itself to the arts and innovation and the theater festival, and we can kind of build off of that momentum by helping to showcase our local talent as well with their families and friends in the community. So, look, we
Yes,
can look
ma'am.
at that. Okay.
We'll work to do that.
Councilmember Larson.
I think this is a great way to recognize our native talent. I do have one question, though, is the stars on the sidewalk are important, but I assume we've got a backup database of some sort where if people weren't familiar with this particular name, that they could go online and get a bio or get a song or get something that would fill in behind just the plaque on the sidewalk? Is there a way that we can give a little depth to these monuments and in the history of the individual? I mean, we've got biographies, obviously, were written of some
I
sort.
think that's a great idea. Mr. Rao, can you and Mr. Garrity work with marketing and our IT people?
Absolutely.
To see if when they go to click on it, you know, the fact that we're doing this and it's going to happen real soon, that they'll be able to see the picture, a bio, and if it's music that they're known for or whatever, that we have that and, you know, limited to like 30 seconds or something, so if they want to pan through them. I think that's a great idea,
Thank you.
Councilmember Larson.
Appreciate it.
We'll make that happen.
Any other questions or comments? May I have a motion, please?
Move for approval.
Can I get a second?
I think Dan just did it.
I was going to give you a chance, Robert.
Well, I was, but I was going
It's
to give
been
you a
moved and
chance.
properly seconded. All those in favor, let it be known by voting. And it is approved. Thank you. Next agenda.
C4, resolution supporting the eligibility of property for the National Register of Historic Places, Bunyan S. and Edith W. Womble House located in the West Ward.
I asked for this again because we do this occasionally. And again, it's so people will know what the National Register is doing and maybe and let them know how different it is from the local register. Okay? Thank you, Ms. McCullough.
Michelle McCullough, Planning Office, Historic Resources. Thank you, Chairman and committee members. And I think Marla wants to take my job, so maybe she wants to get into Historic Resources. Yes, last year, at the end of last year, you actually saw the same house for a local historic landmark. The big difference is this is going for the National Register of Historic Places. The National Register is like the honor roll for our federal government of sites, neighborhoods, and places, structures. They can be tunnels, roads, bridges, all that kind of fun stuff too. So because we're a certified local government here in Winston-Salem, you guys get the opportunity to make a recommendation that we think this meets the criteria that the federal government has set out. And that information should be in your packet for next week, you know, about approving these or recommending them. And it'll go to a committee in Raleigh called the National Register Advisory Committee, and then it goes to the National Park Service. There are no tax issues with this. They don't get any money. They don't get any help. They may apply for the historic preservation tax credits, but then they have to follow a lot of rules to do that program, but they are eligible for that program. But really, it is an honorary thing. You're on this list of my house, my neighborhood is important for this reason. So I think that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you.
Did the greenhouse come from an old house? Rogard?
Yes, it did. It came from, no, I'm sorry, it came from Grayland, right across the street.
Grayland, okay.
When the fire happened, they were going to have to tear that down because they needed to sell the land there to make some money to fix Grayland. So the family took that and moved it to their land to make sure it was saved.
Yeah, okay, thank you. It is a phenomenal house.
Yeah.
Councilman Larson.
Just as a point of clarity, the tax credits, the state and federal tax credits apply only to work performed on the building. Is that
Correct. It's a rehabilitation tax credit.
So if they choose to, for example, replace the roof, expensive replacement, it would have to be done in kind and whatever, and that would be eligible for the tax credit.
Exactly. And it's
not on an annual basis. This is not a...
Right. And again, remember, it's a credit. They would have to pay the money out for the repairs, and they would get that back on their taxes, state and federal. So, and there's lots of rules with that. Anybody has any questions, we can answer those, though.
Any other questions, comments? May I?
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, let it be known by voting yes or no. It's approved. Thank you. Next item, please.
C6, resolution approving revised boundaries for 2 neighborhood revitalization strategy areas and authorizing submission to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Ms. Newman, thank you so much. Again, because all of this is intertwined in community development, economic development, especially with our housing study and what we're trying to do. I think people need to get a brief report on what this is, because tell them what happened.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Adams, council members, Mr. Garrity. A little bit of background. Community development goes through periodic audits by HUD to check our program operations. We underwent one last year, roughly a year ago now, with CDBG and home programs. As part of that, the auditors looked at our neighborhood revitalization strategy area, which you see represented on the map. part of the feedback we received was that and it's the blue area on your map, that area was too large to actually achieve the type of impact that the dollars are intended to target. And one of the requirements is that with those who are beneficiaries, that the investment of dollars is supposed to be apparent to those who are to be beneficiaries. And so with that, those beneficiaries, I'll need to mention, should be low to moderate income persons. The neighborhood revitalization strategy areas should be a contiguous area and should also be primarily residential. So while we met all of the criteria, the biggest issue that HUD found was that it was too large for that impact. So we came to you late last year with a proposal to shift the boundaries to try to achieve that more targeted impact that HUD had suggested that we accomplish. In the course of negotiating what that size should look like, HUD then in February put out new data upon which the neighborhood revitalization strategy areas should be based. Based on that new data, we had to go back to the drawing board. Some areas no longer qualified to fit into that revitalization strategy area that we had originally contemplated. What we decided to do, however, to achieve as much impact as we could, follow the guidelines in terms of primarily residential, the percentage of low-mod income, and the contiguous nature, we will propose with your approval to submit to HUD 2 neighborhood revitalization strategy areas, one north and one south. Essentially what we have, if you look at the other map, there was actually a connection that picked up downtown. That part fell out with the new regulations. And so we are proposing a shifting, and there's some additional shifting for sure, but wanting to try to catch as much of that contiguous residential area as possible. And this revised NRSA would go to HUD along with our consolidated annual action plan that you will be taking up a little bit later, and HUD would still have to approve our 2 neighborhood revitalization strategy areas.
If you can just say, and maybe you already have, it just might have went over my head, why it's so important that we get this right and we do it, and what is it for? What will it bring us, the neighborhood revitalization strategy area?
So primarily, these are the areas where our community development block grant investments will be concentrated. Not that they cannot be used in other places, but this is where we would hone a lot of that investment to support housing rehab, some of the community service agencies that our dollars support. Those persons that they serve primarily live in these particular areas. And so the idea is still to get more impact actually in a way that is visible. Right now, because the area was so large, we could rehab 100 houses, but it was spread over such a broad geography, you couldn't really tell that we'd gone in and done anything to benefit the city or the citizens.
Any questions, comments? Councilmember McIntosh.
I noticed in switching back and forth between this and opportunity zones, the sort of designated areas that we have opportunity zones, that they don't necessarily match up.
That's correct. And they don't have to,
right,
because that was a totally different program.
Right.
There are some areas where you do have some overlap, but not all of the areas are actually consistent with each other.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Clark.
Just briefly, I would recommend you meet with the individual council members whose wards these are to be sure they're in agreement. I know where you're talking about, but I couldn't tell you if you got the right street for the cut or not.
And this is based on census blocks.
Okay.
Yeah, census tract. So it's strictly HUD data driven.
Oh, it is.
And the requirement is that 69.7% of the residents be low to moderate income. And so we just did our slice and dice based on the census data.
Because I'm surprised some of these areas are not blue, but they seem to be specific carve-outs.
Yeah, it's the percentage of low mod income.
Thank you.
And all these areas meet about a 70% benchmark.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Larson.
How does this conform to the targeted development zones we heard about yesterday?
Well, we don't know yet since we haven't actually identified those. So one of our next steps would be to work with the planning department, look at our existing neighborhood plans, area plans, look at the census data. Again, I think I mentioned yesterday, we would look at transit corridors and things of that nature, and then try to do some overlay. So right now, we don't know exactly where those targeted development zones would be, but we're looking more for opportunity areas, more so than just have them be a part of these same particular census tracts. Right. Some of them may end up in some of these census tracts, but at this juncture, I think it's a little too soon for us to say specifically.
I do remain concerned about edges and boundaries.
Sure.
And I guess I would like a little clarity on some of these at some point.
Sure.
Again, if your council will remember, we were sent these maps, not just this past winter, but last year. We've been dealing with this, and HUD has been trying to get everybody back on track, not just Winston-Salem, but you know, a lot of cities with a lot of need created their map, their plan, but it's just so massive that HUD is trying to get, I think, to a business model, maybe, that you've got to be able to have an impact on the community. You can't have it so big, as Ms. Newman was saying, that we'll build a house over here, and then we'll try to build a house 10, 20 minutes away across town, and we can't affect a community, a neighborhood, whether it's Cleveland, whether it's Boston Thurman, whether it's Greenboro Road, whether it's any of those. We have to now look at it differently than what we've done in the past. But I'm sure as we move forward, the Community Development Department, Ms. Newman and Ms. Logan Ford, will be getting with the individual council members to go over so you can understand. And as we communicated not too long ago, this is not necessarily a Winston-Salem plan. This is us being driven by the federal government, the Department of HUD. So on the census tract data in order that it's done appropriately. Thank you so much. Anybody with any more comments, questions? May I have a motion for approval?
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please vote yes. All those opposed, like sign. Thank you very much. And that passed. And now we're going to the general agenda. One of the things we're going to skip G1. The person that was supposed to be given the report is not here today, but we will get that some other time later on. Next item, please.
G2, resolution approving the fiscal year 2020 Housing and Community Development Program and authorizing submission of the 2019-2020 annual plan to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Good afternoon again. I am, again, Marla Newman. I failed to say that earlier, Community Development Department.
We know who you are.
but the listening audience doesn't.
Yes, sir. So I mentioned a moment ago in talking about the neighborhood revitalization strategy area that that map would be a part of our annual plan that goes to HUD. So we, every 5 years, do a consolidated plan, and then each year we do an annual action plan where we look at how we will implement those items set out in that 5-year plan. So what is before you today are the items for the 5-year plan. And just a little bit about those. Again, I mentioned that we are now in the 2nd year of that plan. It represents a continuation of activities that we have supported. It proposes some new activities, and all of the activities that are contained in the plan are tied to the funding that HUD makes for us each year. And our annual plan this year is due to HUD by June 12th. In this particular year's allocation from HUD, you'll see that in 2 of the categories for which we receive funding, Community Development Block Grant and Home Investment Partnership Funds, often known as home funds, we actually saw a slight decrease in our allocation from HUD. So with the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG funds, that was a 1.5% decrease, which represents about $32,711. Our home dollars were also decreased more significantly by 7.8%, and that represents $99,111. On the positive side, in terms of money, but in terms of our homeless, our ability to serve folks who are experiencing homelessness, those funds were increased by 5.7%, which, as you see, it's a smaller pot of money, but that represented $10,710. There is a separate allocation of funds or award of funds that come for the continuum of care, which also serves people experiencing homelessness. That would come to us later in the program year, and the exact amount is to be determined. And we will actually be bringing actions to you all next month regarding both the ESG and the continuum of care dollars. Based on recommendations that came from the allocations, the Citizens Allocations Committee, we had a total of 22 applications for funding for the CDBG Home and Housing Finance Funds. 18 of those applications were recommended for funding. You'll see the amounts there on the screen and on your iPads of how those dollars were allocated between the different programs, CDBG Home and Housing Finance Funds, which are our local housing assistance funds. And then we also have the recommendations that were made based on the ESG funds. All of those 14 applications were recommended for funding by the Allocations Committee. So we're looking to, again, have consistent funding for sub-grantee program operations. The city is the grantee. Those persons with whom we provide the funds are considered our sub-grantees. So these funds allow for stable program operations. Of course, there'll be a small increase for some projects, again, that serve and support the homeless. We will still be able to provide pretty consistent funding with first-time home buyer and rehab projects that we use these funds for, and continue to support our housing rehab program, as well as provide financial and technical assistance to small businesses. The CDBG funds also support small businesses that are within the neighborhood revitalization strategy area. So we are required by HUD to have public engagement and public input. So to meet that criteria, we did hold 2 public hearings, as you'll see, in October of last year as well as March of this year. Then we did a combined presentation and public meeting in partnership with a presentation that was brought to us on opportunity zones. That was held back in February. And then as grantee agencies and potential grantee agencies have had questions about the funding process and how funds can be allocated, we've continued to be in consultation with those agencies that have sought our support. Another part of the public participation is public notice, and our public notices were published in both the Chronicle and the Winston-Salem Journal to make sure that we got broad coverage and notifying the public of the opportunity to comment as well as to attend the public meetings. And so this plan ultimately complies with all of the federal submission requirements that are set forth for CDBG and for the ESG programs, as well as the home program consortia. Winston-Salem is part of a consortium of organizations. We partner with, for instance, Forsyth County on our home funds. And so HUD has specific regulations regarding consortia that they put out, and we are one of those consortium that participate. And so we have taken those steps to comply with the regulations for HUD home consortia.
Any questions or comments for Ms. Newman? Councilman Larson.
Can we anticipate in the next year that the TURN program will be back online? Is that CDBG money?
No, that is bond money.
That's bond money?
Yes, sir.
So, and
Sorry? In the fall.
In the fall?
Yes,
so
sir.
we plan to open it back up in the
Yes,
fall?
sir.
Thank
We're
you very much.
trying to catch up with the backlog that we
I
had.
understand that. We've been doing that for
Yes.
a while. Yeah, that's good.
We're almost there. We're
Yeah.
almost
Thank
there.
you.
But those are bond funds.
Yeah.
Great.
Ms. Newman, could you tell people who the panel was that made the decision? Do you have that information readily, or can you get it to the council?
I can get it to the council of the individuals who made up the allocations committee.
And add this to this agenda item online, so people will be able to go see who those folks were
Okay.
that made the decisions for the applications.
Yes, ma'am.
Another thing is, going forward, we know, as we're seeing, I know the past decade I've been on this council, the money keeps getting smaller and smaller from the federal level. Are we at least thinking about a plan going forward, Ms. Logan Ford, Mr. Garrett, and yourself, as to helping our agencies to understand that times are changing.
Yes, ma'am.
And I know we're the pass-through, but as the money begins even more to diminish even more, how are we going to help them go ahead and start to prepare for the least, the lessening funds? Mr. Garrett.
I would say, Chairman Adams, that we need to do that. We need to have some difficult conversations with a lot of the agencies. I know United Way is facing reductions in funding, and typically the first place the agencies come is to the city. So talking to others, I think some of the agencies may have to figure out ways to maybe merge or work better together, but it is smart for us to get ahead on this, because I think we can expect less funding in the future.
And it might not hurt, particularly after this budget cycle, that we go ahead and at least have an informational meeting and be able to show, just like we bring people in, the agencies that want to put in applications for the CBG money from the city, that we can show them other cities and how they're, faring this process right now. Because, again, I don't want it to be that we didn't tell them, because that's the way people think. We knew and we didn't tell them, but we do know that it's just going to get smaller. The pot's going to get smaller. Councilmember Clark.
If we get maybe an 8-year history on those two funds,
Absolutely.
just the year
Side
of
by
the totals.
side.
I don't
Sure.
care about the allocation.
You're speaking of the totals of the amount that we receive,
CDBG in the home, just
that we
what it
receive.
is.
Sure.
It's kind of
The
lumpy,
trend.
but I think it's downward trending.
It is.
Any other questions or comments? May I have a motion
Move to approve.
and a second? All those in favor, let it be known by saying aye. All those opposed, like sign. Thank you so much. It passes. Next item, please.
G3, discussion regarding potential 2018 housing bond budget.
This was presented yesterday in the finance meeting, as well as G4 and G5, but we're going to go ahead and go over it. For those at home watching, maybe they didn't see it yesterday, that they'll get a chance to see it today. Ms. Newman, please.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you again. So, of course, last fall, the citizens passed a bond initiative for a variety of needs here in Winston-Salem. Included in that bond initiative was $10 million for affordable housing. One of the things that our department looked at was how to best utilize those funds that have been entrusted to the city to achieve our goals for affordable housing. So the first thing we looked at was the housing study and needs assessment that was completed late last year, and what particular objectives we could pull out of that housing study and look at the utilization of these funds to help further those objectives or meet those objectives. And so, as you'll see before you, there were 4 particular objectives that we honed in on that we thought would resonate with these particular funds that were passed by the voters. In addition, as you all passed a motion earlier regarding the strategic plan, we also looked at the discussions that were being held in support of the strategic plan, and recognizing that affordable housing was one of the higher priorities that was identified by council. We thought it made sense to also take that into consideration in figuring out how to best utilize these funds. So to that end, we came up with a proposed budget, and of course some items will still need to be identified and specified going forward, but the proposal is that we take $2.5 million of these $10 million funds to use for targeted acquisition and site preparation. This would include city-owned properties that we have in our inventory that are currently sitting idle, as well as working in partnership with Forsyth County to see if we can create a strategy and process for the city to actually acquire tax foreclosed properties that may be in close proximity to some of the city-owned properties, so that maybe we can bundle properties and create a greater development opportunity. Then we looked at allocating $250,000 to create a pilot for employer-assisted housing. And I failed to mention for that $2.5 million with the targeted acquisition, those would be done in the targeted development zones, which Councilmember Larson asked a question about earlier. So we're looking at, again, how do we target and get that impact and get that scale that first became a question with HUD last year. So the idea is to potentially pilot an employer-assisted housing program in these targeted development zones and actually partner with employers and create some kind of participation fund that can be used for either down payment assistance or closing costs or things of that nature to help various employees, be it with the private sector or whoever participates in the fund. Then we looked at $3.5 million to be used as development incentives in tandem, again, with the targeted development zones. So right now, we do have developers who come to the city, and they ask the city to provide some kind of subsidy, oftentimes to help make housing units affordable. And so what we would want to do is target, again, development in these special areas to get that scale, get that impact, but also be able to require that anyone who participates in these development opportunities really serve a mix of incomes. Of course, we hear a lot about low-income housing tax credit developments. Well, those are targeted at a certain income threshold, usually around 60% of the area median income. With what we are proposing is that developers do mixed income developments so that you can have 30% affordability, 50% affordability, and up your workforce housing, and then even mix in some market rate. And between us potentially providing the land, providing cash incentives, and the market rate units, they should be able to cash flow and be able to be profitable with those developments. Again, we propose to continue with the TURN program, do a TURN round 2, and $2 million is dedicated for that, and some of that would also cover staff administrative costs as we have dedicated staff for the TURN program. We're also moving forward with an enhanced code enforcement strategy that would include both software. The current system that we have is 22 years old and is obsolete, but also we're working in partnership with the Center for Community Progress on creating strategies for the city to take hold of vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties that are often a problem for our code enforcement. And so we're combining those items together, and we are proposing approximately $750,000 for that, the bulk of which would be cost for the software. And then lastly, there is $1 million that we are proposing that would cover implementation of Forever Everyone Home, which was an opportunity, or is an opportunity, that's being afforded to us through an organization called the Grounded Solutions Network, which was a competitive application that we were one of 3 cities selected across the nation to participate in. And that work supports policy, strategies, and development opportunities to ensure long-term affordability. And when I say long-term affordability, we're talking 50 years, 99 years affordability, so much longer period of time than you might have with tax credit projects. So that's the proposed budget, and we know there's some more specifics that we need to bring to that, but we wanted to bring that to you first to kind of get a sense if we're heading in the right direction.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Councilmember Larson. I mean, McIntosh. I looked at him.
Can I get a brief explanation of what you envision as an employer-assisted housing?
Down payment assistance, closing cost assistance for employees who meet our low mod criteria.
So major employers in town would partner with us to identify
employees that could be eligible to participate in the fund. And we would put in some money, and we'd encourage them to put something in the pot too. Because one of the things that we noticed with other examples that I've seen, especially if employees are able to live in close proximity to where they work, right. You have less absenteeism, certainly less tardiness. People are invested in that surrounding area. And so some of the examples we've seen have been very successful. A lot of them have been in partnership with hospitals, universities, and other large employers.
Well, the Macon model is the one that I know of that works so well, Macon, Georgia, with Mercer University. Mm-hmm. And is that pipeline preloaded? Do we know that there are employers in town who want to
Not yet.
participate in that? Okay.
Not yet. So that's why we're going to pilot it kind of cautiously and kind of test the waters and see if there is interest.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bessie.
I had a couple of questions, not necessarily related. One, I know that Objective 4 here is prevent displacement of low-income households. Do we have any strategy to address assisting low-income households who are displaced by circumstances over which we do not have control?
We don't have a policy for those who are displaced and the displacement is not created by city action. So we're not doing development like the ballpark or things of that nature. So we don't have a special program where we displace where we assist citizens who've been displaced because the property owner has decided to convert the property to market rate or what have you.
Yeah, a couple of different examples that have been on our radar recently. The Crystal Towers is one. We've expressed our disapproval, but Housing Authority is not under an obligation to listen to us there. Do they have an obligatory service for assisting if they move forward with that option?
HUD does require a relocation plan. They have to submit a relocation plan with their application to dispose of that asset. So that is a requirement. And the members of our continuum of care are participating in a survey that our office has put together to ask case managers about what are some of the concerns about people potentially being displaced from Crystal Towers so that we can share that with the Housing Authority so that as they put together the relocation plan that goes into their application, they're mindful of what the people on the front lines are seeing with some of the residents and what those concerns are so that they can be adequately addressed in the application.
The other example that I'm thinking of is a different situation. It's the existing Ardmore-Cloverdale apartments. The owners there have turned down every overture for assistance on conditioned with maintaining workforce supportable housing, and there's no public subsidy involved. I am not aware of any program to assist displaced low-income households from that kind of situation. Is there any opportunity for us to consider an assistance program as part of our housing affordability strategy? I foresee more occasions of equivalent problems coming up.
I think there are great opportunities, and two that come to mind most readily. One is something that can be addressed as part of the For Everyone Home implementation, which is an 18-month technical assistance engagement where we're looking at how we support folks who are low to moderate income, but also with our recently established Affordable Housing Coalition. They have some very clear-cut strategies and goals that they are to discharge, and so I could see that would also be an appropriate conversation at that level as well to come with some suggestions and policy proposals, because we would definitely need some policy proposals and actions on the part of council for us to decide how to support those in need.
Yeah, can you put that word in as a priority?
Yes.
Because I anticipate that the Ardmore-Cloverdale situation, I have no way of being certain, but I anticipate that the owners there are probably going to pull the trigger on part of that demolition sometime later this year, and that's going to be a major problem.
Yes, sir.
The other question, the unrelated question, is do we have any authority under North Carolina statute to implement inclusionary zoning requirements?
That is not, and I'll defer to Mr. Andrews. Currently, state statute does not allow inclusionary zoning. I think we've tried to be creative in creating our workforce housing policies and things of that nature. At this juncture, though, I'll yield the floor to Mr. Andrews to elaborate.
Madam Chair, Mr. Bessie, currently, Ms. Newman is correct. We don't have that specific authority. It depends upon statutory changes that will happen. But we'll monitor those and see if there's any movement in that regard, and if there's a way for us to try to push for that, and if it's with other requirements, we can try to do that. Just at the current time, we don't have that flexibility.
If we find any way to push the envelope on that, please let us know. My understanding was that we didn't have that authority, but I thought, sometimes I'm wrong. I should ask.
Sure, sure. We'll keep you posted on any movement in that regard.
Thank you. Mr. Garrett.
Chairman Adams and Councilmember Bessie, one thing we can do too for Cloverdale is if they'll work with us, we could do a kind of a assistance fair. We did that, if you recall, over off of First Street when those apartments were being vacated for the Edge, those large ones that went in. So we went over there. We provided free bus passes, a lot of information, trying to assist. We didn't have cash, but we had a lot of assistance we could provide. So,
please be working on getting that ready, because I'm afraid that it's going to start to happen later this calendar year.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Any more comments? Councilmember Larson, Councilmember Clark, and Larson.
Could someone comment what you mean by exclusionary zoning?
Inclusionary.
Inclusionary. What's the concept?
The concept would be where we would have affordable housing allowed in a number of areas. So where you have zoning restrictions would automatically include affordable housing on some level in those areas where traditionally it's not allowed now. And if we could require
Not allowed or not offered?
By zoning.
But it's not allowed by law, but
Right.
there are areas where you cannot by law offer affordable housing?
Where you cannot require.
No, require, okay, that's the difference, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at, okay.
Yeah.
But it basically requires that in any development that takes place, that the developer include a
Yes.
certain number of units that are affordable.
Yes.
And even, excuse me, again, treading new ground, that it doesn't mean necessarily that we're giving money incentives, but we're asking them to do something good, with goodwill. Councilmember Larson.
Yes, this is $10 million came out of the bond we all approved last fall. And you've divided it up very nicely into categories, and I certainly see the targeted development zone philosophy here, which makes good sense to me. I think what I'm curious about, though, is the life sort of this program. This is not like our annual budget allocation, so this could go over a period of years.
Absolutely.
We're talking about, and how nimble, what we're voting on, well, whenever we're voting on it, how nimble are we to adjust this if circumstances change? Are you going to come back to us and we're going to shift a little bit more money here, a little bit more money?
Absolutely. We would just
still
come back with a project budget.
So this is the broad guardrails in which we're looking for the $10 million at this point to allocate it. Well, I think it's a very creative plan. You obviously have some new material in here, and it hopefully will have the impact effect with these development zones that you're talking about.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more comments or questions? This is just for discussion. Next item, please.
G4, resolution ratifying action taken on March 8, 2019 regarding authorizing the Winston-Salem Community Development Department to submit an application requiring a $75,000 match contribution to the Grounded Solutions Network for the For Everyone Home initiative.
Okay, so glad to be before you again. This is my day. And I guess I got a little eager earlier, huh?
Yes.
So to do a quick recap, back in March, staff came across an opportunity that seemed too good to pass up. It had a deadline of a week out, and we came to you and asked that you give us the authority to make the application for an 18-month technical assistance engagement with Grounded Solutions Network. So that opportunity is called For Everyone Home. It is supported by the Ford Foundation. And one of the interesting things with this particular engagement and the funding is that it required a cash match of $75,000. You gave us the opportunity to apply, and I have information in here for you on Grounded Solutions Network. They're a national nonprofit. They talk about community land trusts, land banks, shared equity ownership models. So again, things that help to achieve long-term affordability, and basic policies where they guide local communities and local governments on how you create those policies and enforce them over the long haul. And again, they work largely with local governments. They do provide some work and support to local nonprofits, especially in terms of establishing community land trust. But we saw that, again, the opportunity afforded us to lift up some of those objectives that were in that housing study and needs assessment. And so, again, we appreciated your giving us authority to make application, which we did in that short turnaround time. And we found out a few weeks ago, again, that we were one of those 3 cities selected. And if I didn't mention it earlier, those other cities were Indianapolis, Indiana, and San Antonio, Texas. I understand there were approximately 32 applications submitted across the country. So we feel like we're in hot cotton right about now, I guess you would say. So at this juncture, we're asking that you ratify giving staff approval to make the application, and also allow that cash match to be put into the pot as required by the application, and authorize the city manager or his designee to execute any of the necessary paperwork that would enable us to move forward with implementation.
Thank you. Any questions, comments from Ms. Newman? Councilmember Larson.
I've got to say that congratulations, just amazing, nimble, aggressive, and problem solving, and that's exactly what we need to help on the housing issues that we're facing. So congratulations. I'm anxious to vote on this when it comes to full council.
Thank you.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, let it be known by voting yes. All those opposed, like signs, and it passes unanimously. Next item, what I'm going to do is, yesterday we had discussion, Mr. Evans and others in the audience, but I'm also going to give the council member an opportunity to speak again if she so chooses on item G5.
G5, information on the previously approved job creation and economic development agreement between the City of Winston-Salem and S.G. Atkins Community Development Corporation.
Good afternoon, Chairman Adams and members of the committee. I will provide you with as brief as I possibly can overview of this item as it was discussed at length yesterday. So this is it's an item that's being brought to you for information today. It is a request, upon the request of Councilmember Scipio, for this committee and council to consider rescinding the approval of 2 contracts with the S.G. Atkins Community Development Corporation, both centered on the East End. The first is a contract that would allow the CDC to access $3 million in economic development bond funding for the acquisition and assemblage of commercially zoned properties in the East End footprint. And the second is the kind of a second 3-year extension of an agreement for project management services related to implementation of the East End Master Plan. And I'll take you just quickly, briefly through some of the history that I shared yesterday on how we arrived at these 2 particular agreements. So back in September of 2016, this council approved funding for Atkins to enter into a contract with a planning design firm that was based in Baltimore to create the East End Master Plan. And for those that aren't familiar with the East End, it is the area that's bounded by Martin Luther King Jr. Drive to the north and to the east, Business 40 to the south, and US 52 to the west. The planning process unfolded over the course of about 2 years, and that plan was released to the public in August of 2018, and that master plan was also approved by the planning board in September of 2018. At the same time that council authorized funding for the master plan, the council also authorized $60,000 a year for 3 years from the Housing Finance Assistance Fund again, for supportive services related to the master planning process. So in June of 2018, the mayor and council authorized the city manager to enter into an agreement with the CDC, again, as I mentioned, to acquire commercially zoned properties in the East End footprint utilizing $3 million of 2014 economic development bond funds, again, for the purposes of economic development. And in September of 2018, this council also authorized the city manager to enter into a second 3-year agreement with the CDC, allocating, as did the first agreement, $60,000 a year for 3 years for services related to the implementation of the East End Master Plan. The only difference in those two was those two contracts being the source of funding. The first, as I mentioned, was from Housing Finance Assistance. The second was going to be funded from the Economic Development Project Reserve. Neither of these agreements have been executed to date, so we are, staff is actively in conversations with the CDC on the language for use of the $3 million in bond funds. We are putting on hold essentially the re-up of that supportive services contract for $60,000 a year until we have language in place for use of the $3 million in bond funding. But I mentioned this is an item that was requested by Councilmember Scipio, and I understand that her request is that she'd like to to rescind the approval for these two agreements to make those bond dollars available for a broader set of development partners, and also to extend the use of those funds beyond just the boundaries of the East End. So if it's decided, we as staff could prepare some information or an item for action at a future meeting based on the direction from this committee and council.
Thank you.
And this was discussed in finance yesterday.
Yeah, and basically he just summarized what staff is going to go do. No decision was made or no action was taken. It's just for the research information discussion. Councilmember Scipio, this is your ward. Did you like to say another comment? I also noticed today we have Representative Montgomery here, and I'm thinking that he will probably want to. Did you want to make a comment, sir? Okay, good. Councilmember Scipio.
I think we did. I love our process. Chairman Adams, you always have said the process. Let's stick to the process. And I think this is a prime example of where the process it should be implemented. But more importantly, that we do our due diligence in how we establish how our tax dollars are being paid. What's happening right now is that we have a great plan for the East End. That plan is actually motivating a lot of interest from the marketplace. We have 3 developers. One called me today talking about how can they be part of this East End energy. And so I think there's so much energy going on right now that the East End will gain the momentum it needs. People are coming with investors. I'm excited about that. I'm excited about some of the plans that are coming forth. I am concerned, though, whether or not we need to, at this point, land bank any land. I'm very concerned about whether that's the right use for those funds. I'm also concerned about actually the contract. We won't go into that today, that I think we need to look really clear about that contract and how the city is either burdened or benefited by those funds, and whether or not we are also fair and equitable to all the other institutions in our area who could take on that job. But more importantly, I represent the East Ward. We have other neighborhoods that have not had any attention paid to them in more than 90 years. There's some opportunities. And people are getting engaged and excited about investing in those neighborhoods. And I particularly want to make sure we have funds on a first come, first serve for people who have great ideas. They want to make a difference. I just don't think we should tie up this money for economic development in one neighborhood, because I have neighborhoods that are also in need. And as people bring forth ideas there, I would like for us to be able to serve them as well. As you know, one of the issues I had with this is that there's no specific project and no specific land that is to be procured with these dollars. I do have problems with how long the dollars would be tied up, anywhere from 5 to 15 years. I think that's unacceptable. There are a few other little things that I have issues with, but I think we have to really look at how the times are changing. And I'm seeing marketplace investment coming to the East End. And I think we should let that work for a while.
Thank you. One of the things, Mr. Raleigh, that I thought about after yesterday was, since the council member and some other council members, the language of our contract. Mr. Andrews, Attorney Andrews, that we seek out, whether it's the School of Government with community development or other cities, as to benchmark the contract, to make sure that we are, as the council members stated, making our deal the best deal we can make, that benefits not just the citizens and not just the city, but all of us together. So I'd like for us to go look at that as well, to look at the contract, and to, again, get the School of Government and all of them involved. That's what they're there for. Mr. Andrews knows that. They help us with community development, the contract itself, how it looks up against other cities that are maybe doing what we're trying to do, because this is new territory. This is new ground for us, this scenario that we're discussing right now. So want to make sure that we utilize all of the tools that we can utilize to get the best outcomes that we can. Attorney Andrews.
Councilmember will be glad to do just that, and we'll get back to you with anything that we find from that research.
Thank you.
That connection.
Any other comments, questions? Councilmember Lewis.
Thank you. The East End project that we funded, the study is very comprehensive. And I would like to hear in these discussions, it's going to require a mosaic of support, perhaps land banking, housing issues, bus routes, a variety of things. And because we've targeted a specific area and we're looking at the targeted development zones and all these other areas, I would like us to back up just a little bit and think about what the city overall strategy is to improve the East End project area. And includes the housing issues, the development issues, and whatever. And can we get an idea of how much money, where we're going to spend it, what our priorities are, everything from sidewalks to lighting to highway improvements to housing to whatever, and get a little better picture as to what our strategy is, instead of piecemealing little bits together every time we sort of turn around and doing something. I would just appreciate that.
Councilmember Best.
Yeah, I just recognized a question that I should have asked before, and just noted in the information item, the bottom paragraph on the first page, allocation of $3 million. The action also authorized allocation of $3 million in 2014 general obligation bond funding to support the acquisition and assemblage of commercial properties and others along the East End area. I know that a number of projects were specifically referenced during the bond referendum, and I could not recall whether the East End development project was specifically represented to the public as a target item in the 2014 bond.
Councilmember Bessie, if the East End was not specifically called out, Those funds were peeled away from the general, I think it was a $20 million pot that we had for just a general infrastructure, economic development, kind of in a large pot. So that $3 million came out of the $20 million pot that we had for ED purposes.
Do we know whether there was discussion of that as a potential project during the public campaigns?
I believe it was not. I could check, but I would guess that it was not publicly discussed at that particular time.
Representative Montgomery, you have any comments? I see you back there throwing your hand up. You want to make some comments about it? I mean, you know the history better than all of us, and you know that. So if you could...
If you could please give your name and address for the record.
Durwin Montgomery, 2021 New Walkertown Road.
Okay.
To the committee, first, thank you. Honored to stand before you all. Different perspective, standing behind this side of it. To Councilmember Scipio, thank you for your service and guidance. And we've had conversation on this item in reference to it. Just from a context standpoint, the conversation around the bond dollars and the bond allocation associated with the East End was a three-pronged process. So there was allocation in the 2018 bond dollars of about $5 million for infrastructure improvements through the 5th Street. There was $1.7 million that was forfeited as a part of street resurfacing to be allocated to housing, because the thought and conversation was always that if you're going to invest in keeping housing affordable in that area, you're going to have to buy down the cost of it. So adding that 1.7 to help buy down the cost of maintaining affordable housing. And then from the 2014 bond, the $3 million that would be able to be utilized to help land bank certain properties so that you could work on the commercial development as a part of it. So having those three components work in tandem to begin to move the project forward was a part of that original dialogue and conversation, because on the $3 million component, it was and had been even conversation with folks in Innovation Quarter and around that if you're going to lead that type of development, you need to have some group that is spearheading the acquisition process. Doesn't mean that that group is going to be the only group that's going to be the development partner, because you see with most developments, they bring someone in to help with that, but you needed someone to be able to work specifically on the side of acquiring the properties, doing that hard, nitty-gritty work, and then bringing the development partner in. But it was three components that were kind of put together to try to start pushing the plan forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions?
Could we get that as part of the follow-up? The stuff he just said, little histories Mr. Larson was alluding to.
Yeah, I really need some help.
Kind of get us all brought up to remind us what we did.
And the one thing I think, too, sometimes in Councilmember Larson, Councilmember Scipio, when we make these area plans, it's just that. It's just a plan. It's no different than when you want to build a house or anything, a project. We don't oftentimes, every area plan that we come up with, there is no dollar amount attached to it. It's getting the community's input as to a wish list of things that we'd like to see, along with consultants as to what are the best practices and benchmarks that we want to use to make our communities better. When you get down to the piece about what's it going to cost, that's a whole nother piece, in that you look at the plan and you decide, okay, we're going to start development right here because we're going to be able to get the best bang for the buck. The dollar amounts haven't been attached to the East Area Plan no more than they've been attached to some other plans, no different than them working on the budget in on Peters Creek and other places. It's driven by the plan, because the plan gives the developers and others a chance to see what it is that the community has said that they want to see. So I'm sure as we go forward with the East Area Plan, as we said, it's a great plan. The council member and others in the community will begin to nail down where do we go and where do we start first. And that's when now you bring in the consultants and people and they start adding up the money as to this is going to cost this, that, whatever. So all of that's coming. That's down the road, but it's coming. Any other comments, questions? Oh, your announcement.
This Thursday at 4 o'clock will be the kickoff meeting for the 2019-2020 budget at 4 o'clock here in this room this Thursday. We will, Mr. Garrity will introduce the budget. We'll go over some summary information, and then we will, I'm assuming, have a calendar in there that will point out the other meetings and we're shooting, normally we will go to the council meeting mid-June for official budget approval by the council, but this is the kickoff session. Thank you.
Also, just for information purposes, Ms. Newman, would you tell everyone the meeting that's going on this Thursday, the first meeting of the coalition?
Yes, ma'am. The Affordable Housing Coalition will be having its first business meeting, if you will, on this Thursday, May 23rd at 10 a.m. in the Public Works Conference Room, which is 348 here in City Hall. And that meeting is scheduled to take place from 10 a.m. to noon.
Thank you. Any other comments or anything? Councilman Bessie.
This is actually not on point with any of the items on today's agenda, but it relates to a previous agenda item for this committee on which some misinformation is circulating in the community, and that is the question of the possible renaming of the fair. There was a suggestion from some individual made to a reporter that if we elect to rename the fair, it's going to cost the taxpayers of the city $500,000 to $1 million. When I heard that, I was concerned, and I immediately made inquiry into that and determined that that was not an accurate piece of information, but it continues to be circulated in the press. And I would like to invite Mr. Garrity to address that question for anyone who's watching to help try to beat back misinformation. And you can certainly have legitimate viewpoints, pro or con, on whether or not to rename the fair. But quite frankly, folks, concern about the public having to ante up $500,000 or $1 million is not a valid concern in this case. Garrity, if that's all right.
Please, that would be nice.
Yeah. First of all, any cost associated with branding or changing names of the fair would not be charged to taxpayers. It would be charged to the Fairgrounds Fund, so it would not hit the property tax rate. Second of all, I mean, there are two different costs. There is the cost we're working on for physically changing the name if the council decides to do that. So probably the biggest cost there would be repainting the mural that's on the backside of the grandstand, a large mural, and lots of little signs and things like that. There's that cost. The other cost that I think has been misstated is the potential for a rebranding, major rebranding marketing effort. I mean, every year we budget about $250,000 for marketing the fair. So obviously, if it's changed this year, next year's fair would be marketing a new brand, and we may choose, and council may choose, to slightly increase that to try to get more fairgoers. But that number is not correct. It won't be close to $1 million to change.
Are you working on finding out what it would cost for the signage and stuff?
Yes.
Yeah.
And as I understand it, we don't have to spend anything extra on marketing the fair.
No, we don't.
And the money that comes out of the fair's own budget of approximately $250,000 a year is spent every year anyway.
Yes.
To market the fair as such. And so if you're marketing it under this name or under another name, it's the same money. It's already in the budget. It's not an increased cost. I don't know who made that suggestion, but it appears to have been based on an individual's calculation of what it would cost to do a major marketing effort from scratch, addressed specifically to a new name, and is not being contemplated, to the best of my knowledge, by anyone. That's right. Certainly not the city council, which would have to approve any such expense.
That's right.
Mr. Garrett, do you have any last comments?
That's it.
I have discussed with the city manager and staff that, again, just like all of us, we have to tell our own story. And when we don't do press releases, and I'd like to see a little bit more press releases from the city when issues like this or anything else, good news. We need to not just be, people see us as running away from those things that are controversial to our city or our citizens. But when we have to write a truth, and we need to write our own story. And thank you, Councilmember Bessie, for those comments, because I've spoken about that when that came out day one, the night of the event, I knew that was incorrect. And couldn't say anything. I didn't say anything, but I want people, again, as Councilmember Scipio said, I believe in the process, and part of the process is being upfront, honest, just, with credible data-driven information that can be documented. And that needs to be, we need a story. That's all I can say. I think we need to help the people understand sometimes what we do, the information that we provide to educate our citizens. Councilmember Larson.
Since the matter has been brought up, when would we expect to see the real costs and how that breakdown would occur? Because obviously the Fair Committee and Public Assembly are in the process of deliberating.
Process of developing those estimates. I mean, we will provide that information when I think those committees begin those discussions, but I mean, it certainly will be just a piece of the overall consideration.
Because I'm sure the press is going to want to, and that's your opportunity to correct, because that thing came out, I think, did it not come out the night of the public hearing is when that thing exploded? Yes, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you all so much. This meeting has been adjourned.